Hello and welcome to my Murders of Karlov Manor limited set review. Today I'm talking about the white cards, all the white cards that are going to be available in the format. This is a limited set review, so I don't care about any of the constructed stuff, really. And that's all I'm talking about. Specifically, mostly draft, sealed, kind of a little bit of an afterthought these days. But, generally, how cards perform in draft is pretty indicative of how they're going to perform in sealed, but, a little bit of changes there. And we're just going to get right into it real quick. For those of you that have not been here before, these are the tiers that I use to grade the cards. Essentially, tier 1 is good, tier 5 is bad, and sort of we go through in between. So you can feel free to take a look at how I grade the cards, and I am just going to get right into grading with our first card, which is Absolving Lamasu. It's a 4 and a white for a 4/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, all suspected creatures are no longer suspected, and when it dies, you gain 3 life and suspect up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. So, this card really, when you think about it, 5 mana 4/3 flyer, and when it dies, you gain 3 life. The suspect stuff is going to come up. There's definitely a lot of suspect things going on in the format. Suspect is very relevant. It's going to be a relevant thing that's happening, and so this will do something. When it enters the battlefield, there are questions about sometimes suspect is on cards and that's supposed to be a downside, and sometimes it's on cards and it's supposed to be an upside. So this card, always removing the suspect, you sometimes don't even want that. Sometimes that's actively bad for you. So that I don't like. I don't like that it's a 5 mana 4/3 flyer. I don't like that. If it ETB'd and gained 3 life, I'd be like, interesting. This is maybe playable. I may be interested in that. But there's some cute stuff with you can do with it. But I think that for 5 mana, I think you just have to be doing more these days. Assemble the players. 1 and a white for an enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. Once each turn, you may cast a creature spell with power 2 or less from the top of your library. So, when you think about this, right, you have to think about what it does. Would you play 2 mana draw a card? No, I would never do that. That is not a good card in limited. Okay, great. So this card, if you cast 1 creature spell from the top of your library, it is not a good card. Alright. Now, if you cast a second, would I pay for 2 mana, draw 2 cards? Straight up, yes, I would. That would be a good card. So, for this to get there, quote unquote, you need to get 2 cards. Okay, but the problem is you have to cast the 2 cards when this tells you that it wants to, right? You don't get to just be like, oh, I'm now gonna have, now I'm gonna just be able to do this whenever I want. You don't just get to always draw a card. Let's say you probably have 8. Let's say you have 10 creatures even that have 2 power or less. That means that a third of your deck, a third of the time, the top card of your deck is going to be castable. It just doesn't do it for me, man. I'm just not seeing it. I think this is just too much do nothing. It's too, in some games, some game states, it's just going to be excellent and it's going to be really good. But I think most of the time you're going to play this on turn 2. You're not playing a 2-drop. On turn 3, you're probably not going to want to play a 2 power creature because it's turn 3 and that's a little bit understated for 3 generally. So you're kind of I'm just not seeing it. I just don't believe. I'm not a believer. I'll have to be convinced. It really is Vindicator. 2 white for a 4/2 with flying lifelink and word 2. It has Disguise for X, 3 and a white. And when it's turn face up, exile up to X other target creatures from the battlefield and creature cards from graveyards. And when it leaves the battlefield, return the exile cards to their owner's hands. So this card is just really, really absurd, right? When you think about it, you technically can play this as a 4 mana 4/2 flying lifelink with word 2, and that's actually fine. You can just do that and that's fine, and you're gonna win the game when you do that most of the time. And I actually think that in a lot of cases you totally should. I don't know how you're really getting there, to be honest with you, because I think you're pretty much always going to just disguise this on 3. Like, if you just have, like you'd have to have a pretty good 3-drop to not just disguise this on 3. Because on turn 5 or turn 6, like, the fact that it goes back to their hand is crazy. Like, crazy wild stuff, in my opinion. And like, because it means that you can get stuff back from your graveyard, and like their tempo is gone. It's so good, and it's like Ward 2 on this. It does everything. It just does it all. Super absurd card. Auspicious Arrival. 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and you investigate. So I'm a big fan of these cards. The 2-mana combat trick that draws you a card or whatever. In this case, I actually think Investigate is probably even like maybe better than draw a card. I know that that's like crazy, like that's a crazy thing, but like making the token being on the battlefield is usually like it's just is really good. Like the trick from Albi one that only worked on toxic creatures and just straight up drew you a card. If it was toxic, I think that's how it was templated. Was good in the right deck, but the problem is that the black-white deck was just like all the toxic stuff failed. So that card, whatever. But the card itself was good when it drew you a card, and this basically does that. And it also makes a token. It makes an artifact that you can use to do other stuff with. And I'm really a huge fan of this card, and I think you should take it. Like, you can play like 4 copies of this. Like you can play as many as you can get, really, because it's just really strong. Call a Surprise Witness. 1 and a white for a sorcery. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a flying counter on it, and it's a spirit in addition to its other types. So these type of reanimate effects, like reanimated mana value 3 or less type thing, we've seen like Recommission. We've seen the one in the last set that was 1 mana and made it tapped. Giving something flying is pretty good. I think this is a fine card. I don't think it's like super absurd or anything. I think you can play it. I think it'll be okay. There's a decent amount of ETBs in the set. You've got your Novice Inspector, which we'll get to eventually. That, like, honestly, even reanimating that for 2 mana is not horrendous. It gets flying, right? Like, I don't know. I don't think it's so bad. There is self-mill themes and like green too. So I don't know. I think this is a fine card, but I personally am not super excited for it. Case of the Gateway Express. 1 and a white for a case. When it enters the battlefield, choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature. And then to solve the case, 3 or more creatures attack this turn. And this can be either your creatures or your opponent's creatures. Though I don't actually know how it works if your opponent solves it. I think it waits till your next end step and then solves. I think that's how that works. I believe. It's possible that that's not how it works. But I believe it waits until the next end step, your next end step. It says on the card, if unsolved, solve at the beginning of your end step. But like, if it's on your opponent's turn, I assume it still solves on your end step. Which again, if this solved like immediately, like if you attack with those creatures and then they immediately just get +1/+0, that would be like an absolute house. That would be tier 1. I've kept it out of tier 1 for that reason. It does require a little bit of time to give your creatures like a permanent anthem, but man, it's just going to be such a beating. Like you kill their 2-drop with you have 2 creatures in play. You kill their 2-drop. Like even you still don't get to solve it immediately, but at some point you get to solve it, and then it's just big. The solve is not free. I want to be very clear that in some games this is just never going to get solved, and that's okay. Like that's fine. Like it's a 2 mana, a little bit janky removal spell in that case, but yeah, it seems really good. It does have the problem of it doesn't work by itself, right? You do need to support this card. You do kind of need to be a more assertive deck. You can't be really a control deck and play this card. But yeah, I think this card is just a house. So, Case of the Pilfered Proof. 1 and a white for a case. Whenever a detective enters the battlefield under your control, and whenever a detective you control is turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And to solve, you control 3 or more detectives. And if it's solved, if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus a clue token are created instead. So this card to me reads like just way to do nothing, right? So on turn 2, again, when I think about these type of cards, like this is a card that I want to play on turn 2, right? The best case scenario for this card is you play it on 2 and then you play detectives for the rest of the game. Okay. So right off the bat, this is basically only a blue-white card, because blue-white's the detectives deck. Yes, white has other color pairs with detectives, but really it's kind of just going to be a blue-white card. Which concerns me, right? That's like, okay, well, I'm limiting myself with what deck I can draft if I draft this card. And then I need to play it on turn 2 and I'm not impacting the board at all. And I need to have a detective. Like, this just seems like such a huge amount to be asking. And you have to control 3 or more detectives to, like, get this done. That is always harder than you may think it is going to be, because your opponent can just be like, sees this on the battlefield and is like, oh, I can just kill their thing that maybe I wouldn't necessarily want to kill, but it's going to solve their case, and then it doesn't solve immediately as well. Like, it's like the solve condition checks on your end step. So maybe, okay, maybe, hold on. So let me just clarify this. The solve condition, like, it checks at your end step. So if your opponent does this, it may not trigger. That, either way, you're going to be the one triggering this 99% of the time. I might be wrong about that. I might be wrong about the rules. I don't know why they would, I guess they would word it this way so they can fit it on the card better, if that were the case. It says unsolved solve at the beginning of your end step. I'm a little confused on the wording. I know they went over it, whatever. Anyways, I think this is a little too janky. I'm not about it. And that's it. Another one that I think is a little too janky. Case of the Uneaten Feast. Single white mana for a case. When a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. And to solve, you've gained 5 or more life this turn. And when you solved it, you can sacrifice it, and creature cards in your graveyard gain. You may cast this card from your graveyard until end of turn. So yeah, I think this is just too much work. Like, this is just too much, like, work. You're just not, like, you're never gaining 5 life. It's just not happening. I'm not super into this. I think it's just too much work, right? Like, there's not a ton of stuff that is like lifelink in the set. I don't even think there's one in white other than at common anyway. And you're never getting 5 creatures to enter the battlefield in the same turn. It's just not happening. So, yeah. Defenestrated Phantom. 4 white for a 4/3 flying with disguise for 4 and a white. So you'll see that in the black set review, they printed a basically strictly better version of this in the same set. Oh, it's a 3/4. No, but like a 3/4, like, yeah, it might be better stats-wise. I don't know why they did that. I don't know why they decided that the white one was going to just be awful for some reason compared to the black one. I originally had this in tier 5, but I decided, you could probably play it. Like, worst case, like, you're probably just going to play it on 3 as a 2/2, and it's not that bad. And then you get a 4/3 on 5, it's attacking, and it's like, okay, sure. You didn't just lose the game, but you did spend, like, a lot of mana. So, I think it's okay, but I'm not excited about it. Delney's Streetwise Lookout. 2 and a white for a 2/2. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. And if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So this triggers ETBs, attack triggers, all that good stuff. Kind of a weird card. That guy on the bottom right is he's looking pretty upset about it. I'm just gonna keep it 100% real with you. He's pretty mad that you have a creature power 2 or less on the battlefield. That's what he's thinking. Yeah, I don't know, this card seems fine, but again, the 3 mana 2/2 is, in a set with a lot of 3 mana 2/2s, it's probably going to be a little more stomachable, but I'm still just not thrilled. Like, I'm not thrilled about making a 3 mana 2/2, and, like, at any point, your opponent can just, like, this one doesn't even have word to it. Your opponent can just go shock, and now you lose the game. So there's that concern. It's unblockable, right? It's not unblockable, but I don't know. I think there's enough here that this card is like a playable card. Like, it's okay. But even tier 3 might be too generous with this. Like, it might just be like, whatever. It might just be like, oh, well, you can't play it. But maybe I just kind of think in a set with like a bunch of 3 mana 2/2s, this 3 mana 2/2 might be okay. But I'm still not putting it higher than this. Maybe it should even be lower. I'm talking myself down. Nah, I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it here. Doorkeeper Thrall. 1 and a white for a 1/2 with flash and flying. Artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Sure, turns off ETBs. It's a 2-mana flash flyer. It's whatever. Like limited, this is likely to turn off your stuff. So I don't know. Yes, you can like get your opponent with it and stop their ETB. Sure, that doesn't happen that often. Like, I think this card's fine. Like it's whatever. Like it's basically I'm grading this as a 2-mana flash flyer that's a 1/2, and I'm just like not super interested. Due Diligence. 2 and a white for an enchantment. It's an aura. When it enters the battlefield, target creature you control other than the enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and gains vigilance until end of turn. And enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has vigilance. So this card is very interesting. I like this card a lot. I've only put it in tier 3 because it's an aura. But I like this card a lot. I really like this card. So the thing about this card is, you do need to have 2 creatures in play. And kind of on like turn 3, you kind of want to have 2 creatures in play on turn 3. If you have to play this on 4, it's not a complete disaster. You know, you're getting in for like 4, and then you're getting in for like 8. Like when the turn you play this card, you're getting in for like 8 damage, like straight up. When you play this, because your opponent's not expecting it or whatever. But the card has a lot of hoops, right? Like, it is an aura, so you can get blown out, so you want to make sure your opponent's tapped out. How do you do that? Well, you have to be assertive in order to, like, force them to tap out, so they develop their board, then you play this, and you have good attacks, right? Like, that's kind of how I envision this going. And in that, like, scenario, it's just so much, like, it's so much statistics. There's just so much of it. Yeah, this just does tons of damage. It just does so much damage. And if you have to, like, on turn 5, play a 2-drop and then play this, like, on the 2-drop, it's bad. Like, that's not a good thing to do, because you're not getting the haste. But it's still not, like, a complete nightmare. So, I don't know. I think this card basically reads, if at any point during the game you have 2 creatures on the battlefield and your opponent is tapped out, you're going to hit them for, like, 8. And that is, like, that's a lot. That is a lot of damage. And I like it. I think it's interesting. I think it's a good card, maybe. Essence of Antiquity. 3 white for a 1/10 with Disguise for 2 and a white. When it's turn face up, creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn. So this one's interesting. I originally just said, oh, it's completely terrible. But I don't know, man. Like, whenever you see a 1/10, you're just like, really? Like, what are we doing? I do think that this, like, 3-mana tricks are just, they're so expensive. They're so expensive. This one, however, I will concede that it does untap all your stuff. It does give it hexproof up front. Your opponent cannot respond because of the way that I assume Disguise works the same way Morph does, where it doesn't use the stack. I don't see why it wouldn't use, like, it doesn't use the stack, so they can't respond. And it's kind of nice to have it around. It's like a nice thing to have. I am still skeptical of Disguise as a mechanic in general, because I'm like, well, I'm playing a 3-mana 2/2 and hoping I don't die, but maybe, you know. Maybe it'll be fine, maybe not. We'll see, but I think this card, I have it in tier 4 just because I'm like, it's so weird. It's like, it's the weirdest, and it's like a 1/10, I don't, whatever. You're never casting this, right? You're never paying 3 white for a 1/10. It's just not happening. So you're like the casting cost is almost completely irrelevant. So you're paying for a trick that you're hoping to use. Yeah. Griffknot Tracker. 3 and a white for a 3/2 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 cards from a single graveyard. No, thank you. It's funny, like, Ultic Cloudguard was in the last set, and that card was, like, the best white common. And this card is literally the same card, except it doesn't give you a 1/1, and I have put it in tier 5. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know. Now, there was artifact theme, all that stuff. I originally had it in tier 4, and I was like, no, that's not bad enough. I'm never playing this card. I'm never going to play it. It's just not happening. And indeed, it has 2 toughness, and it only makes 1 permanent. It's simple as that. It really is just as simple as that. So, not excited about this at all. Hazda Vigilante, 4 and a white for a 4/4. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it attacks, but a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control with power 2 or less. So I think this is a serviceable 5-drop. 5-drops inherently are rated lower on my tiers because they're less valuable during the draft portion. Because you can kind of just like any 5-minute, a lot of 5-minute cards, you can just kind of like interchange them, and they kind of do the same thing. This is good, right? You need to have a creature power 2 or less. A lot of creatures have power 2 or less, but it only works like one. Like if this just gave a +1/+1 counter to something, how would I feel about it? I'd probably bump it up a tier, but I wouldn't like love it or anything. It's still a 5-drop, but I think it's fine. I think it's a reasonable card. Does some good stuff. But again, 5 mana is just a tough ask. Inside Source. 2 mana white for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. And you can pay 3 and tap it, and target detective you control gets +2/+0 and gains vigilance until turn. Activate only as a sorcery. That ability is like super excellent. Like it's really good actually. And this makes 2 bodies, and like I would have this as the best white common if it weren't for Novice Inspector, which we will see, I'm sure, somewhat soon. But yeah, this card's just a house. Like, just making 2 permanents, one of them's a detective, and giving your other detective stuff, and there's like a bunch of white detectives, so it just seems really strong to me. Karlov Watchdog. 3 and a white for a 3/2 with vigilance. Permanents your opponent's control can't be turned face up during your turn. Sure. And then whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So I'm not a fan of this card, as you can see by my grade of it. I think that the permanents your opponent's control can't be turned face up during your turn text is not super relevant, to be honest, because they can do it in response to you casting this card. Like if they were like, oh, I'm gonna hold up my morph and then get you, and then you cast this on 4, they're like, well, I guess I'll just flip my guy now. Like it's not a complete disaster for them. They may stop you from getting like blown out, which is nice, but you're kind of blowing yourself out by playing a 4 mana 3/2 with vigilance. Like 2 toughness for 4 mana, like 2 toughness. That is a low amount of toughness for 4 mana. And the attacking with 3 or more creatures, again, it just seems attacking with 3 or more creatures is not something that happens every game. Like even. It happens sometimes. It happens in like a lot, and it's gonna happen. Like you're gonna try. If you have a lot of these, it's gonna happen more often. But I don't know. I really just don't see it being something that is super consistent. And as a result, I think this card is not very good. Krovod is how you actually pronounce that word. Haunch. Single white mana for an food equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. You can pay 2 and sacrifice it to gain 3 life, as you can with all foods. When it is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a white. If you do, create 2 1/1 white dog creature tokens and equip for 2. I really like this card. Not necessarily a huge equipment, fan, but there's just a lot going on, If you need some life and some tokens, you can do that. If you have stuff on the battlefield and you want to equip things, that's great. It's an artifact. Just does a lot. It just seems really nice. Now equip 2, it's not perfect, but we'll take it. We'll take it with this type of card where there's just enough things going on that we're just going to accept that it's equip 2 and we're going to move on with our lives. Make your move. 2 and a white for an instant to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. I would say that, one of the set's themes is having small creatures power 2 or less, so this kind of conflicts with that theme, which is unfortunate. And these are just too situational. These type of cards are just too situational. You don't really want to run it in the main deck. You can probably sideboard it, and it's probably still not even that good out of the sideboard, but there you go. Makeshift Binding. 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature and opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. You gain 2 life. We've seen this type of effect before. We saw it in Brothers War. That was this, except it had flash, and it exiled an online permanent, and it was an additional mana. But yeah, that card was a house, and this card is also going to be a house. It's really good. It's really strong. Gaining 2 life on your removal is excellent. This is also an enchantment. That will come up in some situations. It being an enchantment is somewhat relevant in this set. So yeah, really like it. Really good card. Market Watch, Phantom. 1 and a white for a 2/2 detective. When another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, it gains flying until end of turn. Yeah, this is a solid 2-drop. You're going to play this, you're going to be happy about it. You're not going to be like super thrilled, but you're not going to fall behind immediately, and you're going to get some chip damage in throughout the game. So it's nice. It's a solid card. It basically plays like, Candle Grove Witch. Candle Grove Witch was like a tier 3 card, and this card should be right along there. Museum Night Watch. 3 and a white for a 3/2. When it dies, create a 2/2 white and blue detective token, and it's disguised from 1 and a white. So I originally thought this card was terrible, and then I thought about it some more, and I decided that it was actually good. And the reason I decided that is, disguising this is really nice because it trades with your opponent's thing, and then you get a 2/2. If you like, that's what if you want. Or on turn 4 you can flip it, or you can just like not flip it on turn 4 and do something else with your mana, and then later in the game you're like, oh, I have this thing, I want to flip it, and then when it dies I make a 2/2, so I'm still like trading, and it's like, so I was kind of like, ooh, I kind of like that. I kind of like what's going on here. But I think just a thing that disguises for 2, I think is inherently somewhat valuable, and for that reason I'm interested in this card. Neighborhood Guardian. 1 and a white for a 2/2. When another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Yeah, I think this is okay. I sort of was playing it through in my head earlier. Like when I was grading these cards, I was playing this through in my head, and I'm like, okay, turn 2 you play this. Let's even assume best case. Let's assume the best case scenario, which is you're on the play. Turn 2 you play this. Turn 3 you disguise something and then attack for 3. And they didn't, for some reason, play it. Like, there aren't a ton of 3/1s in the set, but and they didn't. I don't think there's any 3/1s in the set, actually. That's probably not true, but there are not that many 3/1s, at least at common. So this is probably getting through on turn 3 when you disguise something. Then on turn 4, let's say your opponent disguised something. They played 2/2s. Now they have 2/2s, and you on turn 4 have a disguised thing and this, and your opponent has a 2/2 and a disguised thing. You can't attack with it anymore, right? They can just double block, and then it's like kind of awkward. And then I don't know. I just kind of wasn't thrilled. I just kind of wasn't thrilled. I guess it's repeatable, so you can, if you have 2 things. I don't know, like if you go this into the 3-drop common I just talked about like a couple of slides ago, it's pretty good. You're attacking for 4, and then you get some more of those. Like that's a real thing that can happen for sure. So I would keep an eye out for that. It just makes that common better. Like we don't need, like, that common was already like really good. So this card is not, it doesn't need this card to be better. But I think this card's okay. I don't think it's like super great or anything. No Witnesses. 2 white for a sorcery. Each player who controls the most creatures investigates, then destroy all creatures. It's a wrath. If these type of wraths tend to not be very good limited. It's 4 mana, which is nice, but giving your opponent a card, which is what this is going to be doing 95% of the time, is generally not very good. But if you build your deck around having wraths and your control deck, it can work. It can work. You can do it, but it's just not a flexible card. Not really for me. Not on my watch. 1 and a white for an instant. Exile target attacking creature. Again, similar to the last card, you kind of know when you want it. If you're a slower deck and you are not attacking and your opponent's going to be attacking you, this is going to be good for you. And if that's not the case, then you do not want it. Here it is, Novice Inspector. Single white mana for a 1/2 and it enters the battlefield. Investigate. It's simple. There's not a whole lot more you need to know about this card. It is a 1-drop that comes with a 2-drop attached to it, and that is extremely powerful. It makes an artifact, makes 2 tokens. It's a detective. All this stuff, all these things. It's really good. It's the best white common. It's unbelievably good. I put it into tier 1. Commons don't generally get into tier 1. They're not supposed to. That's not where they go. It's tier 1. Tier 1 common. It's really good. The Raven Inspector was great. This card's even better. Sanctuary Wall. 1 and a white for a 0/4 with Defender. You pay 2 and a white to tap target creature. You may put a stun counter on it. If you do, put a stun counter on Sanctuary Wall. So we haven't really ever... not really... It's a very weird effect, right? It's like, oh, this... we can tap something down for 2 turns if I want, instead of just 1, which is interesting. Do I think it's good? Eh, no, not really. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a 2-mana 0/4, which is not where I want to be. So I just am not thrilled about this card. It does have some late game tap implications, but it's not a huge fan of that, to be honest with you. Seasoned Consultant. 1 and a white for a 1/3. It is a detective. When you attack with 3 or more creatures, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. 2 mana 1/3. It's a really tough ask, especially in a format where you're going to have 3 mana 2/2s all the time that just block this for free. And again, attacking with 3 or more creatures is not an easy thing to do. It's just not. It's just not a thing that you can do every game. Here it's easy for your opponent to interact with, so not a huge fan of this. 10th District Hero. 1 and a white for a 2/3. You can pay 1 and a white and collect evidence 2 to turn it into a 4/4 with vigilance, and you can pay 2 and a white and collect evidence 4. If it's already a 4/4, it becomes a 5/5, and all your other creatures have indestructible. So, yep. It's good. These type of cards, we've seen them before. They're always really good. This one's really, really good. Yep. I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say. Unyielding Gatekeeper. 1 and a white for a 3/2, with Disguise for 1 and a white. When it's turn face up, exile another target non-land permanent. If you controlled it, return to the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, its controller creates a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. So you may see that I think I'm a little lower on this card than most, potentially. I think a lot of people are going to put this in like their tier 1. And they might just be right, to be honest with you. The problem I have is that the removal spell side of this is really bad. Like, giving your opponent a 2/2 for their thing is not a good deal. It's actually like a horrible deal in most cases. So you kind of want to, like, basically, I'm just thinking about this and I'm like, this is basically a 2 mana 3/2. That's kind of how I'm thinking about this card. And what would I rate a 2 mana 3/2? I'd rate it a tier 3. So I'm bumping it up an extra tier for having some flexibility, for generating value, and if you really need to kill something, you can kill something. But I'm not an enormous fan of this, to be honest. Wojek Investigator. 2 and a white for a 2/4 with flying and vigilance. At the beginning of your upkeep, investigate once for each opponent who has more cards in hand than you. So this is kind of a weird card. It's not always investigating, and your opponent has some control over it, but, you know, it is a 3 mana 2/4 flying vigilance, which is just a solid stat line, and that would, you know, that's a decent card by itself, and then sometimes it investigates, and sometimes it doesn't. But even if it doesn't, like, on the play, this card's just a house, and on the draw, it kind of sucks. Okay? You know what I mean? That's just the way it goes, right? So, on the play, you love this card. On the draw, it's still not bad, because it's a good blocker, so. Decent. Wrench. Single white mana for a clue equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance, and 3 tap target creature, so you can tap and tap target creature, and you can sacrifice it to pay 2 and sacrifice to draw a card and equip for 2. I really like this. You can do the thing if you're, for those of you that like to do things, you can have this equipped on your creature, attack with the creature, and then activate this ability while it's attacking to tap down their blocker. It's a cute little thing you can do. It's good, solid. I kind of like that. It's a nice little thing. Turning any of your creatures into like a tapper guy is really nice, and kind of invalidates that defender we just saw like 3 cards ago. So yeah, I like the wrench. I think it's okay. On the job, 2 white for a instant. Target creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Investigate. So we've seen this before. It's like Inspired Charge, I think is the name of the card. That just gets +2/+1. Investigating on top of that's great, because what it allows you to do is white wants to go wide. White wants to go wide. You can see we've seen this in tons and tons of cards. This is like kind of a helpful payoff to, you know, get you over the finish line, but also it can just be used as a value card. You can just say, okay, I'm going to trade with, you know, 2 of your things, and then I'm going to investigate, and then I'm like up because I traded my smaller things for your bigger things, and then I got some damage in too. Just looks like pretty solid to me. Again, you don't really want more than like 2 of these in your deck max, but the investigate is really, really nice, and I think makes it main deckable more in more decks than would usually main deck this type of card. Perimeter Enforcer, 1 and a white for a 1/1 with flying and lifelink. It's a detective. Whenever another detective enters the battlefield under your control, and whenever a detective you control is turned face up, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So, 2 mana, 1/1 flying lifelink. It's not bad. It's not a bad place to be. And then it's a detective, and it enables detective synergies. It's just gonna gain you like a bunch of life. It's just gonna gain you life over the course of the game. There's not a ton of X1 hate in the set, so it's gonna survive. And you know, this looks like it just looks like a guy. He's just hanging out. Kind of looks like a World Championship card. You know what I mean? Like it looks like that style of art where it just looks like a normal dude. So I don't know, but I think this card's fine. I don't think it's like super absurd or anything. It's like it's best in blue-white, but you can probably just play it in any white deck and you'll probably be pretty happy about it. Forum Familiar. Single white mana for a 1/1 with Disguise for 1 and a white. When it's turned face up, return another target permanent you control to its owner's hand and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So, I am a noted enjoyer of these type of effects. I was really high on Stockpiling Celebrant, and that I was rewarded. I was rewarded for my takes on Stockpiling Celebrant. You know what I mean? That ended up being a correct take that I had. This card I am not high on, and the reason for that is it's so much more expensive. It's so much more expensive to do something that is is not a tempo play. It is, I am paying 5 mana to make a 2/2, and I am returning one of my other permanents to my hand. There's just not a ton of value permanents in this set. It's not like Wilds of Eldraine, where there's a literally best common in your color that is a value enchantment, where you can just go, yep, I'll pick this up and make another thing, and then I'm going to win when I do that. This card does not have that in this environment, and for that reason I think it's going to just kind of be terrible and not very good. But I mean, at base rate, it's like a 1/1, it can do some stuff, and I don't know, I don't think it's like completely unplayable, but I don't think it's very good. And last, in white, we have Case File Auditor, 2 and a white for a 1/4 detective. When it enters the battlefield and whenever you solve a case, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an enchantment card from among them and put it into your hand. You put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. You may spend mana as though mana of any color to cast case spells. So, the way I've laid this out is, I have this as a base 2/3. As a base tier 3. Now, if you have like 5... You really need like 5 at least enchantments, right? You really need, and some, you know, if you're playing like a multicolor like case deck, I guess this is the thing. I just don't. The problem is that the white cases don't play super well with this. The best white case was the uncommon that deals like the removal spell, and that's kind of the only good one. The other two aren't very good, so you're gonna need cases from other colors to help you out. This does help you cast those, for what that's worth. And if you have enough of the cases, then this card is really good. I said 5-ish enchantments for this to be playable and for it to be good, and if you have like 8, this card's just excellent, like really, really, really strong. Because but you do have to also solve the cases to kind of get to that next level. But I think just 2 mana, like 3 mana, 1/4 enters the battlefield, finds an enchantment. If it consistently finds an enchantment 80% of the time, plus it kind of needs to be higher than that, it needs to be closer to like 85% of the time, that would be a really good card. This doesn't quite get there for me, and I've put it in tier 3 for that reason. But in some decks it's going to be super excellent, and in some decks it's going to be unplayable. So just keep that in mind. And with that kept in mind, that is the end of this set review for white. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully there was some enlightenment. Hopefully all my takes aren't proven wrong in like a week of the format existing. And if they are, that's great. I'll be talking about it. So, see ya.